to Just Another Stitch. For those that don't know me, my name is Connie, and if you're new to my channel, I'd like to welcome you. And if you are new, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know how you found out about my channel, and let me know a little bit about yourself so I can start to get to know you better. So today's video is the first video for my beginner knitting series. My beginner knitting series videos I will be doing every other week. Typically, they should come out on Sundays. Now, a lot of times stuff tends to happen that gets me off course. So it may not be exactly every 2 weeks, but please bear with me on this. I will get the tutorials out. Just y'all, most of y'all know I tend to get sick a lot, and that always tends to get me off track on things. But this series will be done. Okay, the videos are coming. All right, so on this video, I'm going to be talking about the supplies that you will need for this series. And also, I'm going to be talking about the difference between English style knitting and Continental style knitting. This is something that's a personal choice. I'm going to tell y'all the pros and cons. I am an English knitter, so all the tutorials in this series is going to be taught the English method. But anyway, to the supplies. First thing we're going to talk about is what you need. And needles is a big thing. And this part is going to be a little confusing. My next video for this series will be on knitting needles. So that will give you more background information. You kind of got to figure out what's right for you when it comes to needles. And based on what you're making, depends on what type of needle you make. So needles can get pricey and expensive. Now what I like to use the most is circular. Even if you're not knitting in the round, circulars are good for shawls, afghans that are flat knitting. But this is probably what I'm going to be using when I do the tutorials on, casting off, the knit stitch, the purl stitch, and some of the other few other stitches that you typically need to know as a beginner. I'm going to be using 5mm for these tutorials. So this is my circular, and it measures from point to point all the way about 24 inches. If you do just the cord, it connects right here where my finger is. So right there where my other finger. This is approximately 14 inches. You want something long enough that you won't have trouble doing your stitches, because if it's too short, like this is a short one, you may have trouble. But this is going to come in handy down the road, which I'm about to get into. All right, so that's what I would recommend. Or another option is just 2 straight needles. These are my double pointed. Now, some needles that are straight have like a stopper at the end. It's built in. But an easy solution to that is just put an end cap at the end of your double pointed needles. That way, when you're working your stitches, the stitches can't go down and pop off. Oh, another thing too, as a beginner, I recommend bamboo needles. These are aluminum. You'll learn with knitting, drop stitches is a thing. Bamboo helps with that. That's why we say bamboo at first. This is slicker. Your stitches are easier to fall off. And drop stitches, I will be getting into in this series, and some helpful tips to prevent it. So that's what you're going to need for like the beginner tutorials for the needles. Now, we're going to start learning how to knit in the round. For that, I would recommend a shorter circular, and you will need a circular. This one is 16 inches from point to point, and the cord is about 10 inches. That's what I'm going to be using. I like a shorter cord for knitting in the round, especially when you're doing beanies, which is typically the only thing I can really think of, except for maybe amigurumi, that you would be knitting in the round. But I like a shorter cord. The longer cords, I find you have trouble getting the movement when you're knitting in the round, where you got to keep pushing your stitches over. But all of this is going to make more sense once we get into the tutorials. And for that, I would get a 5mm. Now, after I get into all the tutorials, I will be doing some basic pattern tutorials for a beginner, where I'm going to be doing a dishcloth, a scarf, a headband, a basic beanie. Even though I did do a tutorial on a basic beanie before, that was with my first camera, that wasn't as good of quality. I'm going to redo that. So when you get into that, you're going to need a short circular and 5mm and 5.5mm. Along with that, you will need a set of 5 double-pointed needles and 5.5mm. So that should cover needles. Woo! All right. The other things you will need is a pair of scissors, a darning needle, because I will show you how to weave in ends, stitch markers. I like the little safety pin looking ones. You probably really only need one, but when we get into the beanie tutorial, you might want some extra ones to mark the repeats. So I would say about 10 of these, just to be on the safe side. And a tape measure. And that's going to come into play more when we do the beanie tutorial. So that should be all the supplies needed for this series, unless I forgot something. And if that's the case, I will mention it when we get there. But that's all I could think of that we're going to need. And again, anyone that has requests for a beginner tutorial on something, let me know. I'll add it into the series if I don't have it on my list of to-do things or to-do topics. All right. So now we're going to start talking about English versus continental knitting. And like I said, I use the English method, and that's how these tutorials will be taught. And with knitting, when you do the English, you hold the yarn in your right hand. And that's where you hear that term thrower. Or you wrap your yarn, because you're kind of doing this number when you're knitting. I'm a thrower. That's right hand. So a continental knitter holds the yarn with their left hand, and they call that the picking or grabbing method. Now, this is one of the big pluses to continental style. Typically, people can knit faster if they do the continental style. You have smaller hand motions. Therefore, you can work your stitches faster. Or when you throw, it's more like, compared to just a little movement. So that's something to take into consideration if later on you want to build up your speed with knitting. English style tends to be more natural for right-handed people. So it tends to be easier to learn. Now, the continental method tends to be easier for crocheters to learn because of the way a crocheter is used to holding the crochet hook. It tends to come more natural, where a lot of y'all watching already know how to crochet. So that is something to keep in mind. If you cannot learn from me, seek out the Continental method to see if that works for you. I started off knitting first. I learned the English method. It came natural to me. Oh, and another thing too, when it comes to tension, and I think this may be why I've never had an issue with my tension in knitting. Tension comes more natural if you do the English style method. Where when you do the Continental, tension can be a harder thing to get down with Continental. So that's basically the main differences with those two styles. And I will see y'all again in about 2 weeks to talk more about knitting needles. So I hope y'all are excited about this series. Let me know in the comments. Anyway, I hope y'all are all having a fabulous yarny day. Be the light, and always remember to be the best sparkly you that you can be, and be cool and be kind. Bye.